What's up guys, Asian here again with another PTS video. Today we're going to be taking an examination at Martial Knowledge and how it compares to some other popular support sets worn by both tanks and healers. So for those guys who haven't been following the BTS cycle too much, Martial Knowledge has been updated. So on the live server right now, I believe it's when you deal direct damage, your next attack or next light attack or something deals a certain amount of extra damage. That has been changed in Scalebreaker. So in Scalebreaker, it now, when you deal damage under 50% of your max stamina, very strange proc condition, I know. The enemy takes an increased 8% increase in damage for 5 seconds, and it has an 8-second cooldown. So, how does this sort of play into the overall support set meta, which again is kind of geared towards improving overall group DPS? To give you an idea, 8% increased damage taken is the equivalent of a minor vulnerability, except for this new Martial Knowledge. This 8% for Martial Knowledge does stack with minor vulnerability, so it's on top of the minor vulnerability as well. Now the problem is, one, the proc condition. You have to be under 50% max stamina, which is a little bit difficult to obtain for DPS, which is why it's being considered more as a support set rather than a DPS set. So that's a little bit tricky to get to, especially as healers. It's not impossible to do so with things like Circle of Protection, Bone Shield, Spiders, and Power of Light for Templar healers. It is possible to get down to below 50% max stamina. A little bit challenging to maintain it, but you can certainly do so as a Templar healer pretty easily, and just other healers as well. As for tanks, stamina is your lifeblood as a tank because it's used for blocking, bashing, dodge rolling, everything like that. So staying under 50% max stamina to maintain uptime Martial Knowledge is kind of risking it a little bit. If you have very good sustain, if you have very good resource management, then you can certainly do so. But it is, you are kind of gambling a little bit, making sure that you have to stay underneath that 50% threshold, while at the same time being a tank. So a lot of groups are taking a look at Martial Knowledge more as a healer set than a tank set, but it could be placed on either of them. And so, this video we're going to basically be comparing Martial Knowledge to some other support sets to kind of see where Martial Knowledge stacks up an overall increase in damage done. So, starting things off here first. For most of these, we're going to be taking a comparison, for at least for damage taken, with just minor vulnerability active. And that's mainly because not all groups are running Stamina Necromancers for the additional major vulnerability, but we will also be including major vulnerability just to kind of see best case scenario, worst case scenario kind of thing. So under Martial Knowledge, we have a 5-second uptime with an 8-second cooldown with an 8% additional damage taken. That results in a 5% maximum uptime, assuming that you're able to get that perfect uptime. So taking a look here first at how much you're actually getting out of it. Again, this is with just minor vulnerability. This would be the equivalent to about a 4.6% increase in damage done, which is actually pretty significant. It's pretty strong overall. The old Martial Knowledge before the nerf, because in 5.1.0 when it was first released, it actually did a 10% increased damage for 4 seconds on a 6-second cooldown, which results in a 6.6. So that nerf actually brought it down a pretty sizable margin by about 1.5%, but it's still pretty strong. Now, what happens if you have major vulnerability up from a Colossus? That only increases it by 3.7%, which is still pretty substantial. It's still pretty strong. So I would definitely say Martial Knowledge definitely has a place in the support meta on one of the two support roles, tanks or healers. So I would highly recommend picking up Martial Knowledge here if you are a support role, whether you're a tank or a healer. Probably more for a healer than a tank, but you still want to pick it up. Now, if you want to compare it to Alkosh and Torug's Pact, these two sets here, particularly Alkosh, has always been regarded as a very strong support set. So for penetration, it's going to be a little bit different. So we're just going to be assuming that the penetration that you get from the Alkosh proc and from the additional Torugs, from the Crusher enchant, those will bring you straight down to 18,200 penetration. And so we're taking the 100% max value damage compared to 100 minus the remaining penetration, which for Alkosh would be 33,010. For Torugs, it'd be 638. We are assuming that you are able to get a infused Crusher enchant, and the Torugs therefore would just boost it from 2108 to 2740, which is an increase of 638. So for Alkosh, Alkosh provides 6.4% increased damage. Again, very powerful set here, so you're definitely not going to want to drop Alkosh in return for Martial Knowledge. For Torugs, however, Torug's only gives you an increase of about 1.3% increase in DPS. So in terms of which one you'd want to replace out of those two, you probably want to replace Torug's with Martial Knowledge. Now I'm going to compare it to Yolnahkriin, which gives you Minor Courage, 129 additional weapon damage and spell damage before modifiers. Now, this is going to be a little bit tricky because every build has a little bit different weapon damage and spell damage values, so we are assuming a few things here. So for stamina DPS specifically, we're going to be assuming you're getting 5,000 weapon damage when you're fully buffed up before the Yolnahkriin buff takes into effect here. For magic DPS, we're assuming 3,500 spell damage, which is not completely unrealistic here. We are assuming that stamina DPS, you get Major Brutality, Minor Brutality, the Agility buff, and you have at least one Fighter's Guild ability for a total of 48% boost. Magic DPS, you only have Major Sorcery, Minor Sorcery, so that's only a 30% boost. So Yolnahkriin will provide an additional 3.8% DPS to stamina DPS. For magic DPS, it's much larger because you have fewer, your spell damage is lower, so it gives you an additional 4.8% increase in DPS. So again, pretty strong. So Yolnahkriin probably won't be dropped from Martial Knowledge here. Now, two other sets, I think I have three other sets actually to talk about. First one's going to be Yorwald's Guidance, which improves your Major Force uptime, so that does give you a little bit more additional damage. Then the next one's going to be Dragon Guard. So these both affect Warhorn uptimes, so Major Force uptimes. So for both of them, we're assuming a 4 Warhorn rotation. We have 2 DK tanks and 2 Templar healers. So DK tanks, the base cost of Warhorn on DKs is 250. The bare minimum amount of regen you should be getting as a DK tank would be about 4.16 regen done per second. 3 per second for base, about 0.66 per second from Minor Heroism, and then 0.5 from your passive. The Templar Healers, on the other hand, your base Warhorn cost is 240, and you only have a base multi-gen of 3.5 instead, because you don't have Minor Heroism usually. So in total, this gives us 38 seconds of Major Force, with 61 seconds between each Warhorn cast without Yorwald's Guidance. With Yorwald's Guidance on one healer, typically speaking, you only have Yorwald's Guidance on one healer. This becomes a total of 42 seconds of Major Force, with the still 61 seconds between each Warhorn. So we take a look at the critical damage done modifier here. So we're assuming that we're running the Shadow Mundus. This is the 0.19. We're assuming we're getting 20% from either Elfborn or Precise Strikes. We get Minor Force going, which is the 0.1. And then we have Major Force, which is 0.15 times the uptime, which would be 42 seconds over 61 seconds. As the numerator, 38 seconds over 61 seconds as the denominator. And this results in a very small 0.9% increase in DPS. Yorwald's Guidance isn't actually very strong when it comes to overall group support, at least in terms of Major Force uptime. It does make it easier to maintain good uptimes on Minor Berserk and other buffs, but in terms of just raw DPS done, it's not as strong as the other sets. So Yorwald's Guidance is definitely in the running for being replaced by Martial Knowledge. Moving on to Dragon Guard, again, same sort of assumption here. So 38 seconds of Major Force with 61 seconds between each Warhorn without Dragon Guard. But if we have one tank in Dragon Guard, a DK tank in Dragon Guard, that drops the amount of ultimate needed for Warhorn down to 213. So that results in 52 seconds between each Warhorn, but we still have the 38 seconds of Major Force. So instead of 42 over 61 as the numerator, like we had in Yorwald's Guidance, we have 38 over 52 as a modifier here, and then 38 over 61 on the denominator. And this gives a total of 1.5% increase in damage done. So Dragon Guard, stronger than Yorwald's Guidance, but not quite as strong as some of the other sets that we've mentioned here. It is a little bit stronger than Torug's Pact, but it's still in the contention as a set that you want to kick out for Martial Knowledge if you are using Dragon Guard here. And finally, Morag Tong. So this boosts the damage taken by poison damage by 10% on direct damage hits. Of course, this only affects stamina DPS. Magic DPS, generally speaking, do not deal any sort of poison damage. So we're going to be assuming that you have all stamina DPS with an average poison damage being about 20% of your overall group damage. This is a little bit generous because right now, at the very least, with the Stamina Necromancer meta here, you have about 5% coming from poison injection, and you maybe have another 5 to 6% coming from your double ravage health poisons, which does have a chance of proccing the poison status effect, so it's usually going to be closer to about maybe 15% or so. But if we're saying that there might be some stamina Wardens in group, which Subterranean Assault does deal poison damage, so we're bumping it up a little bit here. A closer approximation would probably be closer to about 15% of group damage is actually poison damage here. And so With the minor vulnerability, it's 0.08, and then we have 10% multiplied by 20% because that's how much damage, poison damage there is happening here. And that results in a 1.8% increase in DPS. If we assume that we also have major vulnerability from necromancers, then it's in 1.5% increase in DPS. So Morag Tong also on the chopping block in return for martial knowledge here. So bottom line, martial knowledge, while it might be difficult to get a full 5% max uptime, it's actually a pretty strong set overall, and I would highly recommend all support roles take a look at picking up martial knowledge. Tanks, for you guys, because it's a light armor set, you will need to pick up jewelry and weapons. Healers, it's a light armor set, so you can pick up armor, jewelry, weapons, however you really want to do it here. And so for tanks specifically, because it's light armor, the jewelry will come in arcane, so you will probably have to transmute it into something, a trait that you would rather use. Triune, robust, whatever you really think is necessary for your particular build. But I would definitely recommend all support sets, support roles to pick up martial knowledge. It's a very powerful set here and will provide a lot of additional DPS for your group. So that is it for this video. Hopefully you guys found this informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.